Good afternoon, everybody. I will just give it a minute before we get started so that more participants can join. Okay, I think we will get started for the day. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Inspire Europe Plus webinar on making friends and influencing people. We are very kindly joined by Darcy Gilly today, who I will introduce a little later on. I will give a brief introduction about the project first, and then we will just go over a few housekeeping rules before I hand over to Darcy. I will just share my screen with you all. So the Inspire Europe Plus project gets its name from the initiative to support, promote, and integrate researchers at risk in Europe, and runs until August 2025. It is coordinated by Scholars at Risk Europe, who are hosted by Maynooth University in Ireland. SAR Europe are the EU organization of the Global Scholars at Risk organization. The Inspire Europe Plus project is an EU-funded project involving 7 partners across Europe. You can see the names of all organizations on this screen. And there are also 3 associated partners, which you can see here. So what does the Inspire Europe Plus project aim to do? The project is a follow-on from the Inspire Europe project, which ran from 2019 until 2022. And the main aim of the project is to strengthen and coordinate support in Europe for researchers at risk, and proceeds from the view that excellence in research depends upon free and open scientific debate and requires a diversity of perspectives and methodologies to flourish. Yet challenges to academic freedom and related pressures on individual researchers remain prevalent, and in many countries and regions, researchers face risks to their life, liberty, and research careers. When researchers are at risk and excluded from participating in the global research circuit, whether due to discrimination, persecution, disaster, or violence, not only are individual lives and careers at risk, the very future of research is also at stake. Therefore, in recognition of a shared commitment to excellence in research and to the principles of freedom of inquiry and academic freedom, the Inspire Europe Plus partners will coordinate activities across Europe to support researchers at risk through to 2025. This includes direct guidance through webinars and trainings such as today, building institutional capacity and preparedness for support, advising national level initiatives, informing European policy, and raising awareness to diversify support for researchers at risk in Europe. As I mentioned earlier, we are very delighted to be joined by Darcy. So Darcy Gilly has been a qualified careers practitioner in higher education for 15 years, specializing in working with research staff and research students. She is a part-time member of Careers Support Team in the Institute for Academic Development at the University of Edinburgh, providing confidential, impartial, expert careers guidance to research staff. She also runs her own careers consultancy, the Career Doctor Online. And having just come from a workshop on helping clients find their purpose this morning, she is delighted to say that helping people have satisfying careers is definitely her purpose in life. So before I hand over to Darcy, just a few housekeeping rules. You will notice that the chat function for attendees has been disabled. However, the Q&A is open. Questions can be raised using the Q&A button, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. If you don't wish your name to be seen, please do ensure that you click the Submit Anonymously button before sending. And we will have around 10 minutes at the end of Darcy's presentation to go through a few questions. So please do just submit questions as and when throughout the webinar, and we will try to get through as many as possible. And just one last thing is that we will be sending a very short survey following the webinar, which we will be most grateful if you could complete. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Darcy for today's webinar. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you, Lucia, for such a warm welcome. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming along today. I was really delighted, and it's very much a privilege to be invited to come and speak to you all today. Just going to share my screen. So hopefully, oops, come on, Zoom. This is what you're all here to see. So how to make friends and influence people. And Lucia's already introduced a little bit about me today, so I won't go into that too much, but just to say that you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy for folk to connect, especially as LinkedIn is one of those essential networking tools, the 21st century. And over my time in careers work, I've definitely seen it grown in usefulness and popularity within academia. So what we're going to talk about today is one of everybody's favorite topics, networking. And one of the things I will talk a little bit about are my experiences of networking, and how I came to be a networker. And I suppose I would best describe myself, I guess, as a little bit shy, a little bit socially anxious, and quite a lot introverted. And I realized at one stage in my career, maybe about 15 or 20 years ago, that this shyness, this introversion, this reluctance to networking was actually really holding back my career. You know, I had ambitions, I had goals, I had a sense of purpose, but I'd only come so far and I couldn't figure out how to get further. And I had a conversation with the director of the career service I was working with at the time. And I was surprised when she came back to me and said, you know, one of the things I really admire about you is you're a good networker. And I thought, but I'm shy and I'm quiet and I just get things done. And I thought at that stage, maybe I don't really understand what networking is. So that was a turning point for me where actually I started doing a lot of research into networking. What is it? How it's done? What's the psychology? What's the impact of it? And this screenshot here is just from a poster that I did a few years ago. It's no longer available, but I built a game, a sort of choose your own adventure game with a student. So we did research, we did interviews, and I think through that process, I learned a lot more about myself and about networking as much as I did about supporting other people's networking. So one of the things I'm going to really stress about today is we've got 40 minutes up to an hour today to look at making friends, influencing people, negotiating, all the different aspects of networking. Is that going to make anybody a stellar, more confident networker? Probably not today, but I've given you some resources and some ideas so that you can take the information that I'm sharing with you today, do your own research, and come up with a plan that's authentic for you, authentic for your career context, and authentic for your career goals. So today is a selection box, okay? It's a lot of bit of random things that I've picked up over the years. What I do have in the slides, which we'll share with you later, are further research and resources, information for understanding what we're talking about when we say making friends and influencing people. I've got some examples of situations which might be similar to ones that you encountered and actions to take. And perhaps the most important bit is some homework. So give you a chance to work on your own to devise a way forward that's useful and meaningful for you. So for example, I was thinking, you know, this morning I was in a 2.5-hour workshop on my own continuing professional development around a particular technique. And even though I invested that 2.5 hours in that moment of learning, I realized afterwards that it's going to take me, you know, a few hours over the next weeks and months to really come to term with that learning, to work out what actions I want to take, and then to eventually apply that learning. So today we're going to look at networking, influencing, and negotiating. Why all three? Because it sounds like it could be a bit confusing. In reality, they're a bit of a Venn diagram. So, when your friend making is turning into influencing, to be able to recognize that. And when you're influencing, it's turning into negotiating. So basically, when we're talking about networking, influencing, negotiating, making friends, we're talking about building relationships with other people. I have tried to include a lot in here because this might be our only chance to explore this together. So it might be a little bit too much, but as I said, you'll have the slides afterwards, and I hope you can come back to them to pick out those particular, little nuggets of inspiration, ideas, actions that are going to be useful for you. So I'm going to put these questions again at the end, but these are kind of the ones that are underpinning it today. This is how you can make meaning for this yourself. And it's really thinking about, what motivated you to be here today? What do you feel is currently preventing you from networking, influencing, and negotiating effectively? Now, you're all different. You're all at different stages of your careers. You have different disciplinary practices. The sort of career trajectories in your discipline are different. You're all in different countries. So it's kind of difficult for me to give a presentation that's going to cover every specific thing for everyone. So I'm trying to give you the raw materials today so that you can construct something that is meaningful for you. And so kind of going on from that, thinking about, well, what are some of your goals in being able to network, influence, and negotiate effectively? And then again, just to reiterate, thinking about how you're going to use some of the things that we've learned together today to make an action plan that works for you. My inspiration for this is a book that was published in 1936, which is still in print and has sold over 30 million copies worldwide. And Dale Carnegie was not the first person to write a self-help book, but he was the first person to get into the idea of networking, influencing, making friends from a point of view of psychology, and also from the point of view of looking at it not from ourselves, which is important, but also helping us understand what is happening or what could be happening with that other person in the networking relationship. So when I've conducted research over the years or have done coaching, individuals say to me that sometimes what prevents them from networking, negotiating, or influencing is a real anxiety or a fear about how that other person might be experiencing it, what they might be thinking. So today we're going to look at just a couple of examples of how to address that so that we can, begin to get over that barrier of not knowing how other people might be experiencing things. All of my workshops, all of my interventions are based on research that's out there somewhere. And so I just thought I'd share a couple of things with you today. So one of the works that I based this workshop on is something called Political Skills at Work, which was produced by some management academics in Florida. And it really talks about the different ways that we can become more adept at creating a positive atmosphere of office politics for ourselves and also for our colleagues. The other book, which is a very, very short book, but it's a brilliant one, is a book called Humble Inquiry. Again, Edgar Schein is a sort of business occupational psychologist. And again, when I'm experiencing people who are feeling a bit apprehensive about networking, it's often because they've put pressure on themselves to be witty, erudite, intelligent, say the right thing. Edgar Schein's approach is really about asking questions. And we're going to see how that joins up with Dale Carnegie's approach of taking an interest in other people as one of the most effective networking tools we have for progressing our own interest in causes. And just a final one here from, again, another psychologist, Adam Galinsky, and his colleague, Morris Schweitzer, looking at almost the anthropology of workplaces and how to negotiate some of the sort of more difficult relationships in workplaces. And I just put a link here to one of Adam Galinsky's talks about assertiveness. And I like his approach to assertiveness because it can be quite difficult sometimes to speak up for ourselves and be assertive. Adam takes a different approach by starting out about how we can be assertive, learn how to be assertive for ourselves by actually being assertive on behalf of other people. So we can use our influence and our courage to speak up for other people as a way to kind of practice and expand the range of influence for ourselves. So just a couple of resources there that may be of interest or help to people after today. So we're going to dive right into Dale Carnegie. And I'm going to start with 3 quotes from his book, which I think encapsulate some of the situations that we most often find in academia. So one of the things Dale Carnegie says is when we're dealing with people, let us remember we're not dealing with creatures of logic. So even though we might be scientists or researchers and objective about our research, and that's debatable, we're not dealing with creatures of logic. We're dealing with creatures of emotion, so creatures bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. And, we're also motivated by pleasure and joy and excitement, okay? So what does this mean for us? So in order to approach people, our colleagues who are creatures of emotion, we need to have some empathetic imagination. We have to try and be able to imagine ourselves in their shoes. And one of the ways that we can do that is by something that in my background of career counseling, we call immediacy. So if we're in a face-to-face or a visual environment with them, noting their behavior, do they seem anxious, worried, excited? And also by things like active listening. So are we really paying attention to what that person is saying? So when I'm actively listening to a client, I'm looking for the repetition of words. So, if somebody's saying, I find that really exciting, really motivating, really exciting over and over again, I've got a sense that they've got, a really positive approach to what they're talking about. Whereas in other situations, I might be hearing people saying, that they're really anxious, they're really worried, something's bothering them. So, I'm picking up on that and really trying to understand how they're feeling. So what might that look like in academia? And I want to share an example of a story. I'm going to tell you a little story about a situation with a principal investigator. So a researcher came to me and they were starting out in their PhD and they were feeling a little bit dissatisfied with their situation because they had tremendous plans for how they were going to develop into the sort of academic that they wanted to be. And it was things like maybe getting some work experience, doing some teaching, some public engagement. And the reason they'd come to me was they were really worried because they felt that their principal investigator was putting up barriers to that and couldn't understand why. And so I got this person to talk through their story. And as I was listening about how they had come to meet this principal investigator and come to be working with them, a question came into my mind, a hypothesis to test. And so I asked this person how many PhD students their PI had supervised already. And the response was, I'm the first one. And so that had put it into context for me. So this PhD student was struggling to influence and negotiate and network with their PI because he didn't really have an understanding, an empathetic imagination of where that PI was coming from. And so I suddenly understood her reluctance to let this person go off and do all these things, especially as a new PhD student. She was worried that he might overstretch himself and maybe lose track of the PhD. So I just asked him, I said, do you know what kind of targets your PI is working to in terms of supervising PhD students? So I won't go in through all the details, but once that PhD student could understand the things that were worrying and keeping his PI up at night, he now had that empathetic imagination. He could understand her position. And suddenly he had new information to go back and try and negotiate and influence and come up with a better plan that between the two of them, they could problem solve and work together so that they could both get what they wanted out of the situation. We'll come back to that idea of collaborative problem solving. I think this is a really, really key one to networking and influencing. And I think if we reflect on sort of situations that we've been in where people have either come to us for something or we've gone to someone else, is the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. In our careers, we're all under different influences and pressures. You know, as in my last example, you know, a PI has targets they have to meet about completion, just as one example. And so we really need to use our emotional intelligence, our self-awareness, and our assertiveness to try and understand what people want in relation to what we want and kind of demonstrate to them how, if we work together, we can both get it. And some of the things that I often use to draw people's attention to what they're saying, especially when they don't seem to be listening to me, is things like, you know, what I'm hearing you say is, or it seems like you're feeling a little worried, or sometimes, you know, when we're talking about projects or collaborations, you know, people can seem a little bit cynical or pessimistic. And so kind of reflecting things back to them. So you say it's impossible or non-negotiable or must. And I think the bottom line here is sometimes when we're negotiating, you do have to give to get. And so in my work, I bring employers into the university to engage with students and staff. And so I had somebody from actually a learned society approach me many years ago wanting access to our students. And I thought, this is great because students often want to go and work for bodies like yours. They don't know how to write the CVs, make an application, do interviews. And I said, okay, you can come on campus. I'll give you access to my students if you can do a workshop about breaking into careers in learned societies. And they would not shift on that. They wanted unfettered access to my students, but didn't want to give anything that would help the student in return. They just wanted that exposure. And so I just moved on from that because I needed to make sure that my students were getting something out of it, that it wasn't just a recruitment exercise for the employer. Oops, did I get that right? And just the last one I want to take from Dale Carnegie is another really important one. If there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. When I'm supporting people who might seem a little stuck in their career or don't have very much confidence in the recruitment and selection process, it's because they haven't stopped to see the process from the point of view of the other people who are involved in whatever that situation is. I'm going to stick to job interviews on this one because it comes up quite often. Is every mock interview I give, one of the questions I ask is, you know, what's keeping your potential line manager awake at night? In an academic context, that could be down to the research strategy. It could be down to, you know, some of the disciplinary, you know, grand challenges. You know, where's the funding being given? You know, it could be anything. You know, how are you going to help them sleep better at night if you've got this research job? How are you going to foster collaborations, etc.? So networking can come in really handy here. So for me, in previous job interviews, I have always contacted the named person on the advert and had a chat with them about what's going on in the department, what their plans are for the future, and all those sorts of different things, as well as, you know, reading things like the research strategy. But I've also contacted people I've known who've maybe had some other connection with that department or organization. Maybe they've done some collaborative work together. maybe they used to work there. And so what we're doing is just trying to gather that kind of information so that we can see it from that organization's, from that recruiter's point of view, as well as from our own. We don't want to just be broadcasting what we want out there. We need to make it a two-way relationship that's good for both people. And that's where the making friends part comes in. I think, it's something that we're going to cover a little bit more detail, but networking, influencing, and negotiating has at its heart of it that idea of making friends, making acquaintances, building relationships. I'm playing a little bit fast and loose with psychology here. So something I want to introduce is this idea of an action observer gap. And this is when we react to what we think the other person is feeling or thinking, in addition to what the other person might be doing. So in a situation as actors, so right now, I'm aware of my own emotional state, maybe not so much my actions, but I'm aware of how I'm feeling in this. And, as an observer to other people, I have access to their actions. Well, maybe not today. I can generally see how people are reacting, but I don't always know exactly the emotional state that's there. So for instance, if I could see somebody right now, maybe they're yawning, and my immediate interpretation might be to think, oh my gosh, they're bored. But maybe somebody had a late night last night, maybe somebody's child was unwell and didn't get a good night's sleep. We often believe our facial expressions are clearly communicating our emotional state. I know from personal experience, when friends, colleagues have walked by me on the street, they think I'm really annoyed. I'm just deep in thought. So I think the bottom line to remember here is we can find it difficult to infer the internal state of others from actions. So a reminder here, things aren't always what they seem. And if the situation's appropriate, when I'm talking with someone face to face, online, I might just check in. And I will say, that seemed to confuse you, or you don't seem particularly happy with that, or can I check in? So things always aren't what they seem. Don't let that put you off. Big one is why network? Before we spend any more energy on this today, what are the benefits of it to you? So a couple of things that we know from research and experience, and hopefully this will be kind of reinforced by some of your own experiences. We know that it improves research and teaching because it exposes you to ideas. It also exposes you to feedback and, constructive feedback, positive feedback that can really improve our research well-being and confidence, our teaching well-being and confidence. It also improves your research teaching profile. People aren't going to know that you're really good at doing something, okay? They're not going to just divine that from the atmosphere. They need to be told it's good. Collaboration is a key part of grants and job descriptions in academia today. And also, it's good for your well-being. Even for introverts like me, we're social animals. And again, there's a lot of confidence and well-being that comes from interacting with other people in ways that feel authentic to us. I think bottom line is, this is one of my favorite quotes from a consortium of occupational psychologists. Many people wait for the ideal job to fall into their lap. We can assure them that won't happen. And I have to say, I've got a word of warning here. I have worked with clients over the years. They've been really plugged into networks. They chair this group, they go to this conference, they go to this meeting, and I will reinforce this at the end. They don't actually ever take action on these networks and on these activities for the benefit of their career. So yeah, it's great to be involved in all those things. Maybe some people are doing it just because they enjoy them and they get energy out of it. Where I would worry is if people are involved in those things because they want their career to progress. It's not just going to happen. We still have to take those actions, even if we have the right behaviors. So I'm just going to skip over this quite quickly. But also we know that networking, negotiating, influencing from research can lead to more interviews and job offers because it is reflective of this idea of a proactive personality. And I really want to stress here, it doesn't mean introvert. So it means someone who develops their job goals, does research into their career areas, puts effort into exploration, so networking, volunteering, and someone who increases their self-awareness, so understands their values and priorities. And I want to stress it's not just about getting the job, but it's about making sure that you've got that social support in your job hunting. And just to underline it, I would argue that this applies to career progression within your chosen area, as well as anyone who's thinking about a career or job change. I meet experienced researchers who know very little about progression processes or criteria because they haven't done the research or had the conversations with people. So what you're all waiting for is, okay, that's all great. How do I do it? This is very much from my point of view. I'm not saying that anyone here today has to stick with any of this. If anything, I hope it's an inspiration for you to go and find and do some research on the internet, as dangerous as that can be, to find ways that are going to work for you. Bottom line, at the end of the day, easiest place to start, closest at home to you. The key to effective networking is cake. Particularly if someone in the audience is feeling a little bit maybe anxious or apprehensive about starting networking, the important thing to do is start in low stakes environment where there's not a lot riding on it, and around something that almost everybody shares an interest in. I've been at a couple of universities over the years, and oftentimes when research students or research staff have started cake clubs in order to increase the sense of collegiality in their department, it's often been highly effective. I also will share with you a story of a researcher I overheard mentoring another researcher. So I was running a workshop and I heard a new researcher who just arrived from Saudi Arabia say to a more experienced colleague who was from Syria, saying, you know, I've just arrived here. I have found it really difficult to meet people. I just feel really shy. You know, everyone seems to know everybody already, and I just don't know what to do to get started to feel more a part of my department. And so her more experienced colleague from Syria said immediately, cake. What you have to do is bake a cake, bring it in. Everybody likes cake. It'll start a conversation. And she said it will break the ice. And you've started building those relationships around something people enjoy. And again, for someone who's learning how to network, it's a low stakes situation. You're not networking over your dream job. You're just bringing cake to people. How do we kick it up a level? Networking, negotiating, and influencing are all about planning and preparation. And so this part of what I'm going to do is a kind of whirlwind tour of some of the different ingredients in, and again, everybody likes different types of cake. So if you don't like the ingredients that I'm presenting today, I want you to feel like you've got the freedom and permission to go out there and look for strategies, look for ingredients that are going to kind of help you make the kind of networking, negotiating, and influencing strategy that you feel is going to work for you. I love this model. I use this for everything. I use this for projects. I use this for career management, everything. It's really simple and straightforward, the Cascade strategy model, for people who like to plan and prepare. Now, there is a saying, planning is essential, plans are useless. You don't want to over prepare because things happen that we don't expect. But I like this model because it gives us a vision, an idea, but gives us enough latitude to be able to respond to unexpected situations, which could be good or they could be bad. So how could a model like this work in terms of a networking strategy? So here's one I did earlier. So we've got our vision at the top, and it's really important to think about, why do I want to network? So maybe it's, and this is just an example, I want to increase my chances of securing a certain fellowship. I've included the values bit, which often works better for projects, but something that I find with people who feel reluctant about networking is that they feel it's antithetical to their values. When I did research with people and asked them, what words do you associate with networking? They're always like, manipulative, it's for business people, that sort of thing. So I think it can be really helpful and motivating to think about in terms of this. Well, what are your values in terms of networking? And so for me, what I really try to get across is a sense of building trust with people, authenticity. So in that relationship, accepting them for who they are, accepting myself and being myself, and also that idea of empathy. So, if I was going to go out and network with somebody about fellowship, I'd be very upfront and transparent about how I thought they could help me. I would be open to how they were presenting that information, recognizing it might not be different for me, but also feeling like I could, be authentic about who I am and what I want. And also just showing that sort of recognition of their strengths, their feelings, and what they bring to the networking relationship. Again, as part of that strategy, I might think about, what are my focus areas? Is it within my university? Is it learned society? Is it other disciplinary networks, conferences, social media? So I need to choose the ones that I think are going to be the most impactful. What's my objective? So I need to maybe gather enough information to evaluate, is going for this fellowship realistic for me? And once I've gathered that information, what steps do I take so that I can maximize my chances of a successful outcome? So I give myself some deadlines, okay? I've got KPIs here. I need to complete at least 2 informational interviews with people who obtain that fellowship, or whatever your objective it is. So an informational interview is basically an interview we set up with someone to find out how they got to be doing what they're doing, okay? And it's just a kind of, I guess, formal term we use for that. And so then, I action plan it. So how am I going to achieve my KPI and meet my objective? And so we'll talk tactics in a minute. It seems like a lot of work. I think for me, this is something that was helpful. I talked about that watershed moment for me. It was helpful early on to help me have more confidence in my networking skills. As time has gone on, I might only use something like this if it's an unfamiliar situation, or it's a really high stakes bit of negotiating and influencing I have to do. So it's just a kind of way of scaffolding. It's a bit like having a kind of life jacket before you learn how to swim. Kind of related to that, and I'm just taking a bit of a tangent about negotiation, is people often come to me with questions about salary negotiation, progression negotiation. I'm not going to go through this diagram. I want to just reiterate how important it is to do the preparation, do the research. I like this diagram because it really breaks down the whole negotiation process. The other resource I wanted to point out is, some of you may have heard of the journalist Mehdi Hasan, brilliant book on how to win every argument, or as he says, you may not win it, but at least you can get your point across in a way that's understood. And lastly, Kwame Christian, who's director of the American Negotiation Institute, I particularly like his work because of how his approach to negotiation does cross those lines of networking and influencing for your career. And I would definitely watch this YouTube video. The person who's interviewing is a little bit annoying, but Kwame is brilliant. And I think he really distills it into 3 important things. Again, we found that with Dale Carnegie back in 1936. Acknowledge emotions. Be compassionately curious. We're going to be in situations, negotiating, networking, influencing with people whose style and way of seeing the world doesn't necessarily line up with what we do. So we have to have a bit of curiosity and find out more about them and have some compassion for them. But as he says, what you really want to do is get to that situation where you've built a relationship and it's joint problem solving. It's just not it's not just a give and get situation. And so related to that idea of being compassionately curious, this is something that I have in my own work. Unconditional client regard is what we use in counseling. I use it when I'm training people in teaching in order to kind of be able to approach their teaching more inclusively. So I think sometimes when we're negotiating with people or networking, we sometimes want them to be someone else. And so with unconditional regard, what we're trying to do is accepting the person for who they are. We don't have to like them, but we have to acknowledge that they're an individual with free will. So we have to see the wholeness of the person and recognize that there are things we don't know about them which might be motivating them to say, be, or feel a certain way, and to try and separate behaviors from people. Something I would love to talk about all day, because I think it's a real essential topic for research cultures and positive research cultures. But I just wanted to make you aware today of it being something that exists. So how much do we need to do? I'm just checking time here. Some of you might be familiar with Dunbar's number. So, 150 people is kind of the number that's recognized as the most people that we can cognitively maintain a relationship, or someone has described it as, you'd know somebody who was within your Dunbar number if you ran into them in an airport and you'd feel comfortable having a coffee with them. It's not so much the number, it's thinking about the quality and characteristics of your network. And again, this is another topic we could spend all day on. What I want to draw attention to here is this idea of weak ties. So strong ties and group networks, those tend to be the places that we're most comfortable, partly because those are the areas where we all think similarly, possibly have similar ambitions, objectives, and values. Weak ties are when we have relationships between vastly different groups. Maybe we don't use them that often. They don't need as much management to stay healthy, but they're really important, particularly in terms of, say, career management or other aspects of our personal development, because they can lead to a diversity of ideas. So it exposes us to different modes of thought, different inspiration, different ways of being. So that's pretty much the end of our presentation. I'm just going to spend the next couple of minutes going through your homework with you, and then we can open it up to some questions and answers. So the first thing to do after today is get a big piece of paper and start mapping your network. Who do you know? Who do they know? And who do you need to know? So I've kind of done it here as a mind map. And, our strong ties are here in green, or maybe they're, people we know well. Red tie here, maybe that's someone we need to know. Okay, so let's go back to our fellowship example. So maybe you know people really well who have successful academic careers and other fellowships. What you're missing in your network is someone who's applied for that exact fellowship. These here, they might be, sort of, looser connections. And I'll talk about closing triangles afterwards, but one of the ways that we can sometimes negotiate, network, and influence positively is simply by introducing other people to each other. So think about your current network. Who are the people? What's the relationship with you? What do they do? think about your current situation in your career. What do you need to be able to do or know as part of your current work or to develop your career? And I think the underlying message here is it's to help us be strategic. There are only so many hours in the day. And so we're thinking about how to make friends, how to involve our friends and colleagues in our lives in a way that is kind of efficient and helpful. I think reflect on the diversity of your network. So think about the stage of career people are at, starting out all the way up to retired. Really important area of expertise. So what career support are they best able to give? So some people might be great for fellowship applications and CVs. Maybe other people would be more helpful in talking about how they managed career and family or career and health. Think about their geographical locations. Remember your weak ties. Are they diverse enough? Are you getting new ideas and being exposed to new thinking? Networks need looking after. So are you engaging in it? I talked about closing triangles. Can you introduce people to each other? So I keep my network connected. I make connections. Narrative CVs are something that, in the UK, we're moving towards in terms of funding applications. So I was able to close a triangle by introducing a new colleague and an experienced colleague to each other. And they're going to remember me now because I did something positive for both of them. Share your work through social networks, online and offline. Get people together. Are you using your network to support your learning? Are you asking people stuff? Are you supporting other people's learning? Think about after today, where are the gaps? So who do you need to know to support your research and your career? Find them and invite them to your network. But I want to go back to something I said earlier. Don't forget, it's not just about the behaviors. It's not just about being involved in stuff. Are you using your networking, negotiating, influencing to take actions on the things that are important to you? And that's great, but I'm an introvert. So just to go back what I said at the beginning, figure out why. It's different for all of us. There's a lot of great resources out there. The thing is, networking is tiring. We're trying to monitor so much. So social interactions can be taxing on our attention. So even when I do a lot of social interactions, I go lie down in a darkened room afterwards. When we go out there to negotiate, network, influence, most of the time it can be a positive experience. When people are rude, most of the time it's them, not you. And in the situations where, we do misspeak or do something which we later wish we hadn't, use it as a learning experience because it's still not you. It's just something we did and we can change that. Just again, a couple of research. So I've got a script for networking outside of academia. But as I said before, you're all doing different things in different places. Do your own research. So, there's how to network for EU projects. I was looking at networking in German academia and I found this article. So there are things out there that you can use for research and support. So that's the end of the presentation. So thank you for listening, and I'd be really delighted to take any questions that anyone has.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Darcy. That was a wonderful presentation and some really great takeaways from that. The Q&A is open, so please do submit any questions that you may have. We have probably around 10 minutes remaining. So any questions, do submit them and we'll try to get through as many as possible. So somebody has said that the part that they find difficult is not starting the conversation, but continuing the conversation. So do you have any tips on how to show the specific person that you're networking with that you would be useful for them to have or interesting? Any tips that you may have?
Yeah, I think that is a tough one. I think it depends on the conversation and maybe the cues that you're picking up. Um, I think LinkedIn has been really useful for me because I can just go there and follow people, send them a message, say, hey, I really enjoyed the conversation that we had the other day for these reasons. Um, might leave it, might come back in a couple of weeks, say, I had this idea or I had a question for you. Could we just have a quick virtual or real coffee? Um, it could be, oh, I remember you talking about something. There's somebody I could introduce you to. So I think for each situation, there might be a slightly different strategy to kind of keep that relationship warm. I think the other thing is if there's a particular situation and you're not sure, is ask around to other people. You won't be the only person wondering about this. And I think you can use colleagues, friends, family to kind of help problem solve that particular situation for you as well. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I think it's really important to, reach out to people that you know and not
Yeah,
feel
absolutely.
worried about that.
Yeah.
Um, a few more questions have come in. Um, so somebody has asked if you could elaborate on how to show interest in others and provide some guidance
Mm,
on establishing rapport across cultures in a networking
yeah.
context.
Um, I think that's another one that really depends. I gotta let you all in a little secret. I have absolutely zero interest in football, but I used to live in Manchester, and I kid you not, the first question everybody I met asked me is, "So are you Man City or Man United?" And it's a kind of facetious example, but one of the things that I did, because I suddenly realized this was hugely important to all my colleagues, was even if I wasn't interested in football, ask them what they did at the weekend and take some interest in terms of, they had, this was an investment for them that felt huge. So I think there's a couple different ways in terms of building rapport. It's just the social side of things. I think coffee spaces, hallways, ways of just taking an interest in people's personal lives, if that's a kind of dimension of it. Not everybody shares that. I think other ways, again, depends on how departments share their information. So at the Institute for Academic Development, we get weekly updates about what's going on with different colleagues, some of them who are research active. It can be just saying, oh, I saw that, newsletter that went around, just wanted to say congratulations on getting that paper published, or, I saw that you did XYZ, can I chat to you more about it? So it's just, again, asking those questions. The political, I'm not saying you should buy it. The political skills at workbook, you can find things online about it. That has really good suggestions for things that you can do to build up rapport building with colleagues in your place of work. It's very American in its language. I say that as an American. If you can get past that, um, I would also say look for country specific advice as well. What I just said will be different in different countries. So,
Thank you for answering that. I realize they're quite difficult to answer without
yeah.
context.
Yeah. Thank goodness for
Um,
the internet for research.
exactly. Okay, we've had a few more questions. Just to mention that the presentation will be shared with everybody. I can see a few people are asking if the slides will be shared, and Darcy has said that they will be. Um, Somebody has asked how to find the balance between spreading out information about your early stage research
Mm,
and involving more people in your network. So perhaps we take the second part of
yeah.
how to involve more people in your network when you're perhaps at an early stage of your career.
Yeah. I think that goes back to the idea of being strategic about it. I think you don't want to close things down too much because at that stage you still want to be open to exploration and serendipitous experience, but you don't want to spread yourself too thin. So I do think it kind of goes back to having some sort of strategy and kind of, even if it's a nebulous vision, insight for that. I think again, this is a bit meta, is doing that networking with other colleagues who are a little bit further on and finding out what they did in their early career, and then, you know, kind of taking some ingredients from that in terms of what you feel is right and could work for you and is quite authentic. And I think, again, you know, just when I'm putting together webinars on networking and things like that, you know, I'm not trying to do myself out of a job, but my approach to networking has always been a pick and mix of other things that people do that they put on the internet. And I think that looks really good. I think I'm going to try and do that. You know, if we look at examples, you know, there's some people out there who, you know, really amazing on Twitter in terms of kind of sharing their stuff and networking. But then I can think of people within my own institution who don't maybe have that global reach, but everybody in the institution knows who they are because they pick and choose the right conferences or right channels within the institution to make sure people know about them and who they are. So use your networking skills to go and talk to some other people about their advice.
That was really useful. Thank you. I can see that some people are raising their hands. If you do have questions, please just put them into the Q&A, as we can't answer questions any other way, unfortunately.
And one of the things that I would stress again, if we don't get to everyone's question, take that away with you and use it as a networking opportunity and try and reach out to other people who could help you with that question.
Exactly. Very useful. I think maybe one more question and then we'll need to wrap it up for the day. Somebody has asked, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, how we can best negotiate with others during an emotional time. So I guess they're speaking about when emotions are high. How best can you negotiate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I would do, because we have a short time, is refer you back to some of Kwame Christian's work. I think, you know, he's been really fundamental in acknowledging the importance of people's emotions in the process of negotiating. And also, particularly that YouTube video, if you can get past his annoying interviewer who interjects, he does talk about strategies for kind of managing that for ourselves and how to be emotionally aware. And that's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked it because, you know, all negotiations will have some element of emotion in them. And your question, you know, recognizes that there is a kind of spectrum of ways to do that. And I think we have to be analytical and kind of recognize. I think one of the ways that could help, I could suggest today, is try and kind of write out what that means for you. So what are the emotions that you're experiencing? I think one of the keys to emotional intelligence is actually to take those emotions and define them. So we talk a lot, for instance, in society about anxiety. I think one of the keys to dealing with anxiety is the definition of it. Is, you know, it's the gap between, you know, information, and it's the gap in information between what's here now and what comes next. And it's also helpful to know that anxiety is something that we evolve to have. It keeps us safe. So I think try and understand what those emotions are from a kind of objective point of view. Look at some of Kwame's research. And again, I think, you know, reach out to people in your existing network that you feel you could safely have that conversation with. Have they experienced something similar? What worked for them? What didn't? Would they do anything differently? And again, do some reading around about it and just, you know, do that research and fill that information gap for yourself.
That's really useful. Thank you, Darcy. I can see that we have a few more questions coming in, but unfortunately the time has run out for today. I'm just going to share my screen one last time.
Okay.
So just a few final points about how you can get involved and connect with the project. So one way is to join the Inspire Europe Plus mailing list. This is where Inspire Europe Plus events and activities will be shared. And you can also join this by visiting the STAR Europe website, which is listed here. And you can also email inspireeurope@mu.ie. And you can also find us on Twitter, or X as it's now called, and LinkedIn, where events and activities are usually shared as well. And before we finish, I just want to say a huge thanks to Darcy for today's wonderful webinar. There's some really great takeaways, and once I share the slides with everybody, I hope everyone is able to do the homework and get doing that, because I think there'll be some great learnings from doing that. So thank you to Darcy, but also thank you to everybody who joined today's webinar. Thank you for joining for the hour. As we said, the presentation slides will be shared, and the recording will be made available in the coming weeks. So thank you to everyone for joining today. And if anyone has any questions, please do just drop us an email and we'll be happy to help. Thank you so much, Darcy.
Oh, thank you guys so much as well. And thank you everyone for attending and for all your questions. So have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Have a lovely afternoon, everybody.
Bye.